Today, a film about Palestine that transports us 90 years to the beginnings of a story that still hasn't ended.
Partition offers a possibility of obtaining a solution of the problem, which does justice to the rights and aspirations of both the Arab and the Jew. Half a loaf is better than no bread at all.
We meet the director of the historical epic Palestine 36 and learn what it tells us about the current moment. I'm Malika Bilal, and this is The Take. Hey everyone, today's conversation is about a Palestinian film that's making waves. If you've seen it, we definitely want to hear from you for your thoughts on the historical drama Palestine 36. But if you haven't, this conversation is still for you, because you'll likely recognize the echoes of the past in news today. Let us know what you think of this conversation. And if you enjoy it, subscribe and tell a friend.
My name's Annemarie Jacir. I'm a director and writer living in Palestine, and that's it.
Well, Annemarie, welcome to The Take. It is really good to have you. Your latest film drops us into a stunningly beautiful but foreboding 1936 Palestine. It is this pivotal moment in time, and yet 1936 is not a date many people think of when they consider the history of Palestine and how that history shows up today. So tell me about what was happening there in the 1930s and the impossible choice that your characters have to make.
1936 marks the beginning of our first mass uprising against British colonial rule. And it's arguably one of the largest and longest uprisings of the time. It follows the story of a group of Palestinians from very different from each other, and that are all affected by this moment, and that make a choice that will change them forever. I didn't focus on the political elite. I didn't focus on the big names. I focused on this group of villagers, and I was very interested in that intimacy of just regular people and how we are affected by history and by politics and the choices we make. So it's this incredible moment where Palestinians rise up and an uprising that spreads across the whole country. And it almost succeeds until the British take it a step up and bring in thousands and thousands of troops and soldiers and machinery and weapons and end up crushing the revolt. But it's never really crushed.
Right. So you have these ordinary people illustrated so beautifully by so many actors and actresses in this film, who are deciding whether they're going to live quietly under this unjust system or whether they're going to resist.
Is it the right of the English as occupying power to distribute the land as they like? Mr. Secretary, what about the land confiscation by Zionists? What is your government doing about that?
It's the British. Why don't we think of the British?
I don't know why we don't think about the British, because really the British and the French are responsible for carving up our entire region. They drew arbitrary borders. It was all about a system of control, separation. And I'm always surprised when going around with this film and showing it, how many people tell me they didn't realize that the British were there, and that part of history has somehow been skipped over. And yet I'm living all of it, all the repercussions of that British mandate in Palestine. We are living it right now, today.
Well, the film is now having a national release here in the United States, where I am, in collaboration with Watermelon Pictures. But it has already won awards. It's been shortlisted for an Oscar, received a 20-minute standing ovation at the Toronto Film Festival. Congratulations on all of those things.
Thank you.
And it probably doesn't hurt that there are some pretty big names, some big stars in the film, from Ham Abbas to Liam Cunningham to Jeremy Irons. What do you think the reception to Palestine 36 says, if anything, about how Palestinian stories are being received in Hollywood right now?
It's an interesting question because we've had an amazing reaction, and starting with Toronto and also in all the theatrical releases, we've been surprised in every territory. We just started the U.S. release, and the first weekend, we were one of the top playing films, and it's like we feel that the audience is out there, and it's wonderful. And then being shortlisted for the Oscars. But on a deeper level, there's still so many barriers to push through. I think there's, as much as we're receiving love and support, we have as much as the same amount of pushback, shadow banning, people who refuse to screen the film, festivals, cinemas. I mean, we were banned. The Israelis, we were having an amazing release in Palestine of the film in the theaters, and it was really successful. And then, they stopped it and halted it, and we're no longer allowed to screen the film in Jerusalem. So
Wow.
it's both at the same time. The obstacles are plenty, and I think there's still a lot of people who don't want to hear the Palestinian story.
Okay, well, the obstacles are plenty, so let's talk about a little more of them. I've read that Palestine 36 was years in the making, and that when it was finally time to begin filming, the October 7th Hamas attacks and Israel's genocidal war on Gaza began. So what did that mean for production?
That was the knockout that of spending, I had spent, of course, almost 8-9 years financing and writing, and then we'd spent a year prepping for the film in Palestine. And that was the moment where everything was halted. We were no longer able to film. We lost our locations. We couldn't move. And it was a really devastating moment for Palestine. And so the first few months were about really just, safety, understanding, trying to reach our friends and family in Gaza and the West Bank. But we had already started this project with this, sort of, crazy sense of freedom, actually, that it was never going to be a project that was, easy to do. And so we started it knowing that, before October 7th, we're living under occupation. We've done all our work like that. Everything is, we didn't have freedom of movement before. We were getting through checkpoints, and sometimes not getting through checkpoints. We were getting stopped by settlers on location scouts. Like, all of that was present. That was the atmosphere. And we were like, we're going to do it. We were very aware we were doing something that a lot of people thought was impossible, and very aware that there had never been anything like this done in Palestine. So after October 7th, I think we just still had it in us. It was maybe dormant for a couple months, and then we came back like twice as strong, that no, we have to do this, and we will do it.
Mm. You also had to deal with land that looks different than it did in the 1930s. And then that comes with its own logistical problems, and having to also deal with the Israeli occupation on that land. So how did you deal with that? Walk me through some of those.
Looking for example, the village in the film. Most Palestinian villages were razed to the ground after 1948. They don't even exist. And that's the heart of the characters and of the film, is their village, and we couldn't find a village. So we found one we had to restore and renovate, and it was all about planting the crops of the 30s, and yet we were surrounded by reality. In that village, the original village we were supposed to film in, when you looked around, there were settlements all around, like modern settlements, not the settlements of the 30s, So,
Right.
so it was a lot about how can we film this with our limited budget, and make it look like the 30s and be the 30s. So we have to erase some things. Even when we were in Jaffa, we were planning the shots in Jaffa, and there's Tel Aviv in the background, these huge skyscrapers. So we have to, we're with our VFX team. We have to, we have to erase this. We have to erase that.
Well, one of the things that's really striking about the visuals for this story is all of the archival footage you found and you colorized, because this is a fictionalized story, but it's based on true events. So the footage is there. Were you surprised at all about how much the British filmed? Because they filmed everything, the good and the bad and the ugly. Did that shock you at all?
I was amazed how much there was, yeah. And it wasn't just Palestine, it was all their colonies. They were filming all the time, and because they were creating these newsreels and putting them out in the world, and they were very proud, I think, of it. But what's amazing is they filmed daily life, very mundane things, and British life in their colonies, British life in Palestine. And they also filmed their crimes. Blowing up houses, searching people. And it makes me think a little bit, I mean, not to jump to the future, but it makes me think about Israeli soldiers today in Gaza and the way they're filming, all of these crimes and these things that they're doing. And I find that really interesting. That's another subject.
No, it's not. Annemarie, thank you for bringing that up, because as I was watching the film, I had this dawning feeling that, wow, the British filmed everything. Why would they show this? And like you said, they're actually pretty proud of showing what's happening in their colonies. But it does remind me of headlines and images and TikToks and reels that I've seen of Israeli soldiers holding up women's lingerie after breaking down the door of a home in Gaza. I'm reminded of images of them parading behind men with their hands behind their back and shirtless on the floor, blindfolded, as they've just detained them. And the film itself unpacks a lot of the complexities of what was happening during the Palestinian revolt and the nature of British colonialism, but some of those same complexities are clearly still present today.
Yeah.
How many of those parallels did you see in the making of this?
A lot of parallels. And you're right. I mean, doing all these things like as if they're normal is how, to dehumanize a people. I mean, the fact that just a couple of days ago, the Israelis passed a law in which the death penalty, you can kill people who are Christian and Muslim, but not Jewish. That's become normalized.
Death sentences only targeting Palestinians. A law that far-right National Security Minister Tamara Khandaker has been advocating for and celebrated with a bottle of champagne inside the chamber.
So I think all of these things like that the British, they set up this system of occupation, of control, collective punishment. It was, administrative detention. I mean, all the things of, even the wall, the check, I mean, all of it. The way you can convince yourself what you're doing is okay is because the other people on the other side don't count. And we feel that, I think we feel that now more than ever. I don't think it's any different.
One of the more visceral examples of this for me was this point in the film in which a young Palestinian man from the village, he's tied to the front of this car by British soldiers to be used as a human shield, I guess, as it speeds away.
This is my little brother. He hasn't done anything. We have just buried our father.
Condolences.
That has happened. Israeli soldiers strapped a Palestinian man who was wounded to a military vehicle during a raid.
That particular incident happened while we were shooting that scene. We're filming a scene where the British strapped this boy onto their vehicle so they can get out of the village. And then we're seeing like that same day, it was uncanny that happened in Nablus. And so the parallels were always there. And in making the film, we felt that all the time. I mean, everything, we were filming during the genocide of our own people, and we're filming scenes of violence. And it was raw. The emotions were very raw. And there were moments even where there were some fights between some of the extras on set, the British soldiers and the villagers, because people just were really feeling it and feeling it very deeply. And I think you do see that. You see that on screen. I think you feel it in the actors. There were days, some of the cast, it was like, devastating and painful. And there were days where it was like, it brought us together and made us tighter. It made us, everybody felt like it was important what we were doing. Nobody, not just the Palestinian cast, the international, crew that was with us, like everybody felt this sort of feeling that we've got to do this because this is, saying that we will not disappear, and Gaza is resisting, and Gaza is like, people are fighting for their lives. So we owe it to them. That feeling was always there.
Well, I want to shift to something personal, or the personal here, because this film feels personal. You hail from a Palestinian family from Bethlehem. How personal was this story for you? How important was it for you to tell this particular story?
Everything is personal and everything is political, and I come from a family, both sides, both parents are from Bethlehem. And these years really formed a lot about who we are. My grandfather was a journalist. I come from a family of writers and people and he was very broken by his experiences, and 48, and then to experience 67, and like all of those losses affected him deeply. And he was angry all his life. I think he never got over that, being broken like that. And then my father, who, always came at everything with hope and whatever. I'm looking at him today, and he just turned 90. He was born in the year of the revolt, 1936. And now we're here again. He's never known anything else, and none of us have. And so it's personal, because it's never ended. It's just why the film wasn't a period film for me. It's set in the 30s, but it's about today, and also the resilience, the revolt itself, that people are resilient, also never ends. And that's something I wanted to celebrate in the film, and the fact that we will keep going, and we do keep going.
Well, finally, Annemarie, I want to end with something that you touched on in the very beginning of this conversation. You said that there was a moment in which the Palestinian revolt was almost successful, that the British might just have lost if they hadn't decided to pivot and become even more brutal. And sometimes it is not productive to think of the what ifs in history, but you are a storyteller. So I'm hoping you will indulge me just a little bit here, because I really do wonder what you imagine Palestine might look like if that revolt had been successful.
The revolt was against British colonialism. It was also against Zionism, Zionist colonizers coming to make Palestine a monolithic place for Jews only. That is what we reject, because that is not the nature of Palestine, and it shouldn't be. Why would anyone want to accept that? So there's that moment in the film of the Peel Commission where they talk about partition. This is, of course, 11 years before the Nakba, the idea of partition. And the characters are hearing what is on the radio in that moment in the film was actually what was said.
Partition offers a possibility of obtaining a solution of the problem, which does justice to the rights and aspirations of both the Arab and the Jew. Half a loaf is better than no bread at all.
Wow.
Yeah.
So is that the real recording?
It's not the real recording, but it's exactly the real words. It's the real words. And I found that so shocking.
And that scene itself, it rocks you. It rocked me because the camera pans to the faces of Palestinians around a table as they look with disgust and disbelief and horror and realization of what has just been announced. One of those faces is my former colleague and one of my good friends, Ahmed Shahabuddin,
Yeah.
sitting at that table.
Yeah.
So the scene just really transported me, and it felt so very real. Was that the intent?
Yeah, it was the intent, and it's like it was meant to feel like just long, and you hear all those words. And I had written it, with the characters being really like it sits like a heavy, heavy boulder. Now, Amir, the guy who plays Amir, he started to cry in that scene. That's not in the script. But he was feeling that. He was really feeling it, and he started to cry. And then one of the other guests at the table, you see a tear come down, and it's for him, for his character, because he is sort of believing that the project, the British, mandate project, is something that will offer him something, and even Zionism will offer him. It's modernity. It's moving. It's good for business. It's a way out of this. And he realizes he's been duped, and he will be left out of this process. And for me, it's a heavy moment, especially for him. But that tear, those tears of the character of Dhafar were, he was feeling it. He was really listening to those words and feeling it.
Annemarie, it is a testament to how many layers there are to this film that we have shifted. And I want to get you back to what I said was my final
Yeah,
question, but there was so much to ask.
We went somewhere else.
And I love that about these kind of conversations. Do you ever think about what it could look like if that revolt had succeeded?
I think, I do think about what it would look like. This was a farmer-led revolt, and the British couldn't control it, and they lost control. And that's why they crushed it, and they needed to crush it quickly, too, because World War II was on the horizon, and they needed to get out of there and focus on other things. I think about what it would have been Palestine all the time, because it's the Palestine that my parents were born. My parents are of that generation, the last generation to live in Palestine before it was partitioned. I think about what would have been different, and I go to other countries sometimes, and I feel like, and I think we all do that as Palestinians, especially I feel that when I'm in other Mediterranean countries. I'm like, this is how we could have been. This is how like life just would have been if we hadn't become refugees. We're not even living in Palestine. We have the sea. We have like great food. We have like, we have like a life here that's now gone. And so when I go to other countries, I think I always go, this is something that this should be normal. This is normal life. And we don't have this. We could have had this.
Annemarie, thank you so much for this conversation and for this film and your other films, your work in general. It's really been a pleasure. Where can people watch?
Well, Palestine 36 has just been released in the US. It's in many other countries as well, palestine36.com. There's a list of all the other countries. But in the United States, Watermelon Pictures is distributing the film, and it's in theaters all over. And if it's not in your theater, you should ask your theater to bring it, and they will.
Annemarie, thank you very much for this conversation.
Thank you. It's a pleasure talking to you.